Hi everybody, it's great to be here. You are in the right place. This isn't the Peaky Blinders auditions. I elected not to speak with the microphone, so can I just check that people can hear me okay? Can you hear me all right at the back? Yeah, good. I asked that question once and a guy at the front put up his hand and said, I can hear you just fine, but I'm happy to swap with someone who can't. Just before we get started, I'm going to be talking a little bit about learning and memory and the brain. I just want to do a kind of quick check. If you could stand up for me, please. You're welcome to put your drink down there. If you just stand up, what I'd like you to do is using your hands, indicate how much sleep you got last night. So if you didn't get very much, it's like a little bit like this. You got a lot of sleep last night, like that, yeah? So how much sleep did you get? That's great. If you could just hold it right there. There we are. Standing ovation for my session post to Twitter. Thank you very much. That's a wrap. So I will be talking about learning and memory. I don't want to bore you. That's the worst thing that can happen with an educational experience. That's what happens with my daughter often. She comes home from school and I say, how was it? She says it's boring, which is shorthand for I didn't remember kind of anything at all. Hopefully we'll make this memorable, but I've realized that something has already gone horribly wrong. Does anybody know what's already gone horribly wrong? Yeah, we know this format, right? This is, you know what this is? This is education. Oh my God, we're doing education. So this is like literally the sage on the stage. The very thing that we kind of critique as being ineffective. And what do we know about education? What do you know about this format where I just kind of stand up here? I mean, you know how this works, right? You know that I've got a whole bunch of slides, and this is the stuff that I care passionately about. You may or may not care about it, but you know, I'm just going to plow through all this content. Pretty much, you can fall asleep, do what you like, it doesn't really matter. What do we know about that as a... Yeah, death by PowerPoint. How effective is it as a learning approach? Not very. I mean, a year from now, what do you think you'll remember? If I make like 200 points in this speech, how many of those do you think you'll remember? My guess is you'll be like, Nick, who? When? Where? And here's what I know about this. Unless I do something really kind of out of the ordinary. So unless, for example, I quite unpredictably produce a bag of giant marshmallows and start flinging them at people around the room in a way which is slightly haphazard. Oh! Breaches several health and safety regulations. Right at the front, yeah. One over there. Very good. Okay. So here's the odd thing that I'd be prepared to bet money that pretty much regardless of what I say over the next kind of 40 minutes, that me lobbing marshmallows around the room for no particular reason, or me getting you to do the kind of the standing ovation thing at the beginning, are the things that you're most likely to remember. Why is that? How can I predict that? They're unexpected. Sorry? You're active in it. That's interesting, isn't it? That's so anti so many of the things that we do in education, the way that you've described it. But if I don't do this, if I don't do a silly thing with the marshmallows, what are you each likely to remember from this session? Probably you'll all remember different things. What has been an odd experience of giving lots of talks is that at the end of the talk, people come up to you afterwards and they say, I think this point was really interesting that you made. And I've noticed that they all remember different things. So why would that be? Which things will you be more likely to remember if I do this talk?
Something I can use.
Something you can use, something that's useful, relevant, something you care about. Sometimes people say, you know, what resonates with me.
Something I disagree with.
Yes, so that's a really good one. Something that makes you angry, something you want to argue with. So fundamentally, this is the problem with this format, is that the things that you will remember will be the things that struck a chord with you. And I don't know you. I haven't taken the time to get to know each of you. So I can't possibly know what's going to strike a chord with each of you. So I end up doing a terrible thing, which is I just talk about what I care about. And it's hit and miss. There might be something in this that you like, there might be not. How would we fix that format? What would I need to do if I wanted to make this a memorable experience for every single person in this room?
Personal.
Yes, I'd need to really understand each of you and adapt it. And then if I was doing that, I probably wouldn't do it en masse. So you can see we're in a fix. We're doing education, but education isn't learning. It doesn't work for learning. So this is what I've sort of been saying in a nutshell, which is that learning and education have become completely different things. Education is a weird set of cultural practices that we came up with a couple of hundred years ago. Imagine the entirety of human history, we didn't have education. The Roman Empire came and went without education. Oh yeah, there were some people educated, but that was primarily people who were effectively the aristocracy. Everybody else, their parents were expected to educate them. They grew up like they do in every culture and learn from their families. Learning is a very natural thing. It's what animals do. Animals don't sit in classrooms. Animals don't take e-learning courses. Not that we know of, anyway. But interestingly, chickens can learn from video. You know that? You can show a chicken a video. I'm making all of this up. No, I'm not. You can show a chicken that they learn through observational learning. Lots of animals do. But education is this weird set of rituals based on memorizing facts for a test. Whereas learning is reaction-based. This is what I've been saying. If you have a reaction, if you hate something I say, that will be the thing that you remember. If I throw a marshmallow at you, you might remember that. If I get you to do something funny, you might remember that. It's not about facts. You will remember almost none of the facts from this evening unless you're passionately interested in some of them. Learning is often task-led. This is really important. Many of you will be in businesses wondering how to apply this to education. It's the tasks, the things that we have to do that really drive our learning in business. If nothing else, bits of research like 70-20-10 show that. It's the work, the challenges that drive our learning. And learning is often about a conversation. As soon as somebody starts lecturing, it gets boring. People wonder why that is. Well, as we'll see in a minute, learning is this kind of to and fro between what two people care about. That's what happens in a good conversation. People talk about the things they care about and they connect. Such a simple idea. Learning is user-centric, education is instructor-centric. Learning is often implicit. Around 75% of expert knowledge is implicit. They can't articulate it explicitly. And yet what we do in schools and education is the explicit side. We neglect all of the things you pick up implicitly. Learning is context-centric. Education is often content-centric. When we design courses, people often start the conversation with, what are we going to put in the course? Which is a terrible place to start. You should start the conversation with, what is it you're expecting people to do? What are the challenges they face? How can we help them with those? And learning is, as I hope you see, playful and not anxious. So where did we go horribly wrong? Hands up if you recognize this stat. Yes. Do you know, can you tell me what this is?
It's the forgetting curve.
Yes, it's so-called forgetting curve. A guy called Ebbinghaus, 1885. I say so-called because what he did is he wanted to investigate memory, and he got together a list of what he called trigrams, which were gibberish syllables like XFP. And he gave people a list of those things, and he asked them to remember them, and then he plotted how long they could remember them for. And he found that almost all of those trigrams were forgotten very quickly, and he called it the forgetting curve. But it's not. It's got nothing to do with forgetting. All it shows you is one thing, which is that the human mind throws out gibberish. If I just stand here all evening and spout 3-letter trigrams, you're not going to remember any of it. That's all he discovered, is that the human memory is not designed, in fact it's very effective at throwing out rubbish. And I'm not the only person who made this point. One of his contemporaries, a guy called Bartlett, pointed out he wasn't investigating memory, he destroyed memory. And yet, this is the problem, is that this was taken to be the forgetting curve. This was supposed to show you something interesting about memory, and he discovered that you could force feed people gibberish by getting to repeat it over and over again, which has now become rote learning. So lots of people are talking about spaced repetition and how you can hammer home really meaningless corporate garbage by getting people to repeat it over and over again. That's a terrible thing to do. It's monstrous, it's brutality. It's like hammering in a square peg into a circular hole. Instead of trying to figure out why it doesn't fit, just pound it again and again and again. If you don't believe me, you can try it for yourself. Hands up. Well, hands up if you have kids. Anyone got kids in the room? Yeah, okay, cool. If you take a picture of this and show it to your kids and say, you've got a minute, let's say, to try and memorize as many of these as possible, what do you think they're going to do?
Look for the rhymes.
Well, yes, look for the rhymes, but you will notice that some of them are meaningful and some of them are Ebbinghaus-type gibberish.
Make a story.
And make a story would be great. And I'd be prepared to bet good money that they're far more likely to remember the meaningful ones than the meaningless ones. Human memory is all about meaning, what matters to us. And we've known this for a long time. This was a piece of research from the 1970s, I think, from Barrow and Clark. It's probably the most powerful piece of research in memory that I know about. What Barrow and Clark found is if you make something into a story, you can improve memory for it 7-fold. 7 times improvement in memory for words if they got people to make them into a story. And of course, that's what we do all the time. We tell stories. You tell a story on a Monday morning. We like to share stories. We like to gossip. But science generally doesn't like stories very much. Why doesn't science like stories?
Because of variability.
Yes, they're inexact. They're variable. They distort. But the point is, that's you. Stories are how you encode the world. Our memories are inherently distorting and unreliable. This is a lovely piece of research by an organization called brand.com. They looked at people's memory of the Starbucks logo. They asked people to draw it from scratch. And it's incredible. What they found was that people remember next to nothing except the presence of a woman in the color green. Our memories are remarkably poor. If you don't believe me, you can try it for yourself. Try and draw a £5 note from memory. You'll be astonished at how little of it you actually remember. So what's really going on? So I think we promised to talk a little bit about neuroscience, but I won't go into detail unless anyone's super interested. This guy, Donald Hebb, probably said one of the most important things to know, 1949, neurons that fire together, wire together. Anybody heard that expression? Some of you have. The basic idea is that as you move around the world, your neurons are constantly firing in response to what you experience, and they're forming new connections. And so you probably all have this basic idea of the mind, that somehow your brain is rewiring in response to what you experience, right? But this leaves the central question unanswered. What is it encoding? What is it storing with those connections? Is it sounds? No, probably not, because people don't remember sounds terribly accurately. Is it sights? No, because we've just seen that your memory for what you've seen is typically very poor. Even people with so-called photographic memories don't remember exactly what they've seen. Is it semantics? There were some learning theorists that suggested what you're remembering is the meaning of what you're seeing. But that seems implausible because animals use very similar memory systems. What kind of semantics do animals have? Do they understand the concept of a chair? So I'm going to try and answer this question. What is it that your brain is storing all the time as you sit there now? How is it working? The answer is emotions. Your brain is storing only your emotional responses, which is probably the craziest thing that you will ever hear somebody say, the most ridiculous sounding thing. But there's an increasing body of neuroscience which supports it, and more importantly, it explains what you see every day. If I do something in this room which is emotionally impactful, you will remember it. If you look back on your lives, it will be the emotionally impactful things that you tend to remember. Where this theory that I'm going to propose in a second goes a step further is it says you have subtle emotional reactions to everything you experience, and you use those to reconstruct what you've experienced, which is why it's so inaccurate. You just remember how things made you feel. And this is really important because it explains something that I described at the beginning. Different people will have the same experience and remember different things. Why? 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 Computers don't do that. They remember exactly the same thing. Why do we remember different things? If you and I take a train journey and I'm fascinated by architecture and you're fascinated by flora and fauna, you remember the plants and I remember the architecture. Why? It's because I react to the architecture and you react to the plants. So how does this work? Well, the effective context model, which is the approach I proposed about 10 years ago now, says that all cognition, including learning, is basically affective responses, emotional responses. It's hard to say anything more radical or to overstate that. That goes back to Plato. Plato argued that reason and emotion are separate. I'm saying that's wrong. I'm saying that all thinking is emotional. I'm saying that thinking is just fancy feeling. So what happens when we experience something? What happens with learning? Well, what happens is you experience something. Perhaps early on in life you experience something which is a little bit scary like this, and you have this initial kind of horrified reaction, this general kind of anxious response to it. But as you get older, your emotional reactions, a little bit like your visual system, become more sophisticated, and you have very subtle, distinct reactions to different things. Now, you might think this is a crazy idea, but have a look at these haircuts. I don't doubt that if you met these different individuals at an interview, you would have a different emotional reaction to those different haircuts. But could you put it into words? Probably not. Think of the sound of a mosquito. That has a feeling attached to it, doesn't it? Everything that you experience, like dropping a pebble into a pond, it's the mirror of your affective responses which enables you to experience it, to store it, to remember it, and to reconstruct it. There's a lady called Elizabeth Loftus, if you're interested, who did a lot of work on eyewitness testimony, and she found that people's memories for events are incredibly unreliable. In fact, you could get them to remember things that never even happened, so-called false memory syndrome. But the way that she distorted memories was by using words with different emotional significance, by using questions like, how fast were the cars going when they bumped, or how fast were the cars going when they smashed? And that altered people's estimations of speed. So I want to talk about how you can apply this in practice, because some of you may be thinking, well, this is all kind of very interesting theoretical, but what does that mean for kind of real life? It means that you're always in one of two conditions. Either you are pushing affective significance, or people are pulling. Let me give an example of what I mean. What do you do if you're really struggling with something? If you've got a problem and you absolutely need to kind of sort something out and kind of fix it, what do? You Google it or YouTube it, yeah. And if you Google it, what kind of format do you get back?
Video?
You might get video, yeah, or text. And typically, you don't get an instructional format back. Nobody Googles e-learning. Has anybody actually ever Googled e-learning modules? I just want to know, who are you? Which is kind of weird, isn't it? Because if e-learning was... I spent 15 years developing e-learning modules. I was a Flash developer for a while. And it's like, if there's such a great educational format, why is nobody Googling them? Why are they so deeply unpopular with everybody? Because when you pull content, when you really care about something, it doesn't matter what the instructional format is. You're quite happy to go and read something on a forum, because if it answers your pressing need, you'll remember it, you'll use it. In my experience, people will generally want the simple, straightforward answer first. In fact, in the content that we've developed, the most popular content is checklists. Which is odd, isn't it? I started as a psychology lecturer. I spent many years in instructional design, building e-learning modules. The most popular thing we ever produced for new starters was a checklist. And that's strange. Why is that? Well, the theory here says it's because if you're really keen to figure out what to do, you just want the answer. But there is another condition, which is push. What if somebody doesn't care about something? You want them to care about, diversity and inclusion, or you want them to care about data protection, and they just don't care. What do you do then? You can't just give them a checklist, right? You've got to make them feel something. Anybody else agree with that?
Yeah. Or make it interesting.
Make it interesting?
Yeah, or make it compulsory. I mean,
Yeah.
There's a documentary on Netflix, and it's a rapper, and he was trying to upskill people into fixing stuff in their house, like how to rejig their car, or install lights. And he got porn stars
Yeah.
to do the task.
This is a completely different direction than I thought it was going to take.
No,
But I'm fascinated to see where this goes. Sorry.
But make it interesting. But they
Yep.
did a regular video
Yep.
where, and the recall was like 20%. Then they got the porn stars to like rejig the car and rewire a light, and the recall was like 80% because it was interesting.
John, are you taking notes at this point? So, yes. Sorry. Yeah.
Make it relatable.
Yeah.
I think it's quite important, like really just latch onto how it relates to that individual.
That's super important. Is it Roberta? Roberta, thank you so much. That's actually, if I could have paid you, that would have been the answer. I'll pay you later. That would have given, because relatable is a very important word, because it means relating a new concern to an old one. I'm not totally bought in on the porn stars thing. I'll tell you why. Because just selling things with sex, which is, people might be interested in sex, and it's a fairly basic concern, but just bolting something in on top of that seems to me a bit risky. But a lot of my experience has come from diversity inclusion. I've done a lot of work in diversity inclusion, and they did a data study, meta-analysis, thank you, of something like 500 diversity inclusion programs, the old school ones that we used to build, where everybody gets told how they're supposed to be sensitive to the various kind of strands and legalities, and they found that it in fact had a negative impact on diversity inclusion data within organizations. But we moved away from that in the designer programs, and we began building inclusivity programs, and the premise of that was everybody wants their voice to be heard. Everybody in an organization wants to be included. And so on the basis that you want to be included, you want to be respected for your differences, you should accord people the same respect. And those were far more successful as programs because they built on an existing concern. They understood that people cared about being included, and that therefore you could bridge from that into including others. What you can't do is just sort of bang people into a room and tell them this is how you have to behave. So actually making things relatable in the way you describe, understanding what matters to you as an individual and relating learning to it is the most powerful thing you can do, because it builds on what people care about. So it's a lovely answer, thank you. So I want to show you some examples. But before I do that, how would you do these things? How would you find your way in a strange city? Help your daughter with her homework? Google, yeah. Yeah. What else? Get lost, yeah, that's a nice one. Any other ways? I think it pretty much is. I mean, sometimes people say ask a friend. Gentleman at the back.
It depends on generation.
Yeah. I think it varies by personality as well. I have this sort of social phobia, so I will only speak to people as a kind of a last resort. But I understand there are people who quite the opposite. You know, I stand in elevators with them and just freaks me out. You know, I'm trying to mind my own business and they're starting a conversation. But I've asked this question many times, and no one has ever said classroom or e-learning. And yet the funny thing is, these are the weapons of choice for many organizations. So you see my point, learning and education have drifted off in different directions. And the problem with this is that classroom is light. People like to get together, but more importantly, they like to feel valued. They like to feel like the organization spent a bit of money on them. We know this because we've talked to them about why they value classroom training. They like the networking. They like to feel like they've been recognized. But it's ineffective. They don't remember very much, and it doesn't transfer back into performance. And it's expensive. So organizations have turned to e-learning, but e-learning is deeply disliked. Jane Hart's Learning in the Workplace survey, she runs it every year. Every year, e-learning comes at the bottom of her analysis of thousands of people. But we carry on because it's cheap, but it's equally ineffective. There's a US Department of Education meta study that looked at the comparison between classroom and e-learning and found it equally ineffective. So what do you do instead? You can do two things that will radically change what you're doing in learning. You can design experiences, or you can design resources. And what's an experience? An experience is a simulation of something. It puts you through the experience that you might have in real life. It's like learning by doing, if you like. And a resource is something that will just help you with the challenges that you have. So one thing is setting people challenges. The other thing is helping people with the challenges that they have. But fundamentally, it's the challenges that drive learning. And if you're just sitting here, not being challenged by me, not really caring about any of this, if none of this is challenging, you're not going to remember any of it. Now, I want to show you how powerful this effect is, because I want to create a lasting memory for somebody, something which they'll possibly remember for the rest of their lives. So let's have a go at doing that. I need a volunteer, though. Volunteer, lady at the back there. Would you mind, thank you very much for volunteering, by the way. Would you mind coming up on stage? Yeah, well done. We have a round of applause for the brave lady. So, thank you. Hi, I'm Nick. Nice to meet you. Hi. Nice. So this is a game I like to call 60-second consultant. And we use it, because I work in consulting, to train sometimes new consultants. The reason we use it is many of them are not used to standing up in front of a group of people talking about something they may not know very much about. So we give them this challenge which sort of resembles that a little bit. So you're going to pick a card.
Okay. Should I pick a rail card?
No, not the rail card. That was a terrible idea. Any card. And then you're going to have to talk about it for 60 seconds as if you're a consultant pitching.
I put my hand up.
Yeah. So can you tell, for the benefit of the audience, what is the subject you're going to talk about persuasively for 60 seconds?
I'm trying to persuade you about this subject.
The audience.
Oh, the audience.
This is your, these are your clients.
This is difficult.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. 4 years.
No,
I mean,
but-
yes.
This subject is difficult.
Do you want a different
Am I
one?
allowed to talk about it though explicitly, or am I supposed to hint at it?
No, you can tell people. You can, yes, you can. You can tell people. I don't want it to be a traumatizing experience. Can you think of anything?
Let me think of something.
Would you
Yeah,
rather?
I work at Tilt, so people know quite a lot about me.
Do you want to choose a
Yeah.
different one? Just choose a different one.
What was it?
It was something that people don't know about me.
Yeah. What's the card you got now?
Oh God. How to be intense and mysterious.
How to be intense and mysterious. Everybody wants to know how to be intense and mysterious. I'm going to buy intense and mysterious training if you succeed in pitching this to me. So, are you ready?
Can I have another look?
No, you can't just completely destroyed the form.
Oh, I like this one.
Okay. So, you're going to talk about
Hugging in the workplace, do's and don'ts.
we need to buy this training. Hugging in the workplace, do's and don'ts, and your 60 seconds starts now.
Okay, so when hugging in the workplace, you don't want to be octopi hands, right? You don't want to be just kind of hands are wandering, hands akimbo. You want to keep your hands visible, okay? It depends how well you know the person. If you've had a frisson, fine, maybe the hands can wander a bit. But you keep it professionally, right? To give a good hug, solid, really hold on. Not for too long, okay? So, again, don't want to be lingering, don't want to be creepy. Unless perhaps pre-shot. And the don'ts, I think I've talked about the don'ts. The do's.
What about hugging from behind? Is that?
Well, again, I mean.
No. You're really selling children.
Hugging from behind. Just make sure they're aware that you're.
With like a horn or something else. Onk, onk. And then you go for the. Yeah.
But hug openly, hug warmly, hug with, kind intention.
We've got about another 30 minutes. I'm really into this. I think it's much more interesting than my topic. Thank you very much. Can we have a round of applause? Okay, thank you very much. So that was brilliant. And somebody actually said right at the beginning, an experience can make it memorable. I don't think you'll forget that in a hurry. I honestly don't. And so putting people through an experience is a very powerful way to create a memory because they react. Generally, when something's happening to you, you react so much more strongly than if you're just watching something. You can go and see an Avengers movie and not remember very much. It's very emotional, for sure. So why don't you remember it? Because it's not something that's affecting you directly. It's there to entertain you. Experiences that impact us emotionally, we will remember. I'm going to give you all now an experience that I hope some of you will remember. It's an experience that we used with leaders, actually. I used this experience last week. But it's quite simple. If you could take some Post-its, and one Post-it each, and hand them along. I ask you to take a Post-it and hand it along. And there's one over there. So what I'd like you to do with your Post-it, oh, sorry, we should be able to, is write down. Oh, you've got some already? Wow, you came equipped with Post-its. Who does that? More Post-its over this side. I'd like you to write down one of your deepest fears. Your deepest fear. Don't worry, it's going to remain anonymous.
I know mine.
Sorry. Anybody else need any more Post-its? Yes, I've got them. So, having already. Oops, sorry. Please write on the piece of paper one of your deepest fears. You can be. Please don't put your name on it. It's intended to remain anonymous. It will remain anonymous. Some more deepest fears. Just going to scrunch some of these up a little more. Yes, sorry, thank you. Right. Any more deep fears to go in the pot? So what I'd like to do now is to, again, ask for volunteers. Could we have 5 volunteers, one after the other? I'd like you to come to the stage and to pick out one of the fears from the bucket and from the hat and read it out, and then without judgment or comment, sit back down. Does that make sense? So who would like to be the first to pick out an anxiety? John, yeah. Yeah. Thanks, John.
Yeah, right. Just read it out and then head back.
Yes.
Okay. William Defoe.
Very good. That's unusual, but another deep. Somebody else to read out a deep fear. Thank you.
Serial killers.
Serial killers. Thank you. Another deep fear. Who else would like to? Lady here.
I have got shoes on.
That's okay. You don't have to have shoes on.
Thank you. Snakes.
Snakes. Thank you. 2 more. Anybody else like to? Thank you. Discover a deep fear. 2 more. Thank you very much.
Doing posing. Losing my family.
Losing your family. Thank you. 1 more. 1 more volunteer. Yes. Death. Thank you. So, how is that a learning exercise? Doesn't feel like a learning exercise to me. Isn't learning exercises where you give them some facts and you memorize the facts and you do a quiz? I'll tell you why we run this exercise with leaders. We get a room full of senior leaders and we get them all to put their anxieties in a hat, and then one by one they read out they're afraid of not looking competent, they're afraid of not being up to the job, They're afraid of what their team will think. They're afraid of missing their deadlines. And they learn something. What do they learn? They learn that every other leader, all the people who they thought weren't struggling with things, with anxieties and with uncertainties, are struggling with problems of their own. And it's quite a transformative experience for them. We know that because we ask them afterwards, and they see it as a highlight of the session. It's the first time they've realized that everybody is anxious about being a leader. It's not just them. They sit frightened in meetings thinking, well, they all seem to know what they're doing. And so learning isn't education. You can be profoundly changed by something that isn't about memorizing facts. In fact, probably memorizing facts doesn't change anything.
What's the behavioural change on that after post-exercise?
Yeah.
Do they become better managers, or do they change their way of working?
We set them missions. So the behavioural change we drive by saying, now go and do this exercise with your team. So there's a whole series of behaviours that we drive through. We built a nudge app which reminds them to shift their behaviour, and then we can quantify how much they've actually changed, how much they've done the things that we ask them to do. So the answer is, if you're thinking about kind of level 4 analytics or level 3 analytics, we actually measure the extent to which they've run these exercises with the team. We measure the team's engagement across a number of kind of Gallup measures, and then we also score whether or not they've actually shifted their behaviours with the nudge app that we've created.
Over what period of time?
It varies. With the pilot that we've just started running, we've only got data from a couple of months. When I worked at BP, we had data for a longer period of time. We had pulse data for a kind of period of years. So yeah. It's there to shift performance and engagement. That's why we create what we do. There's a question at the back.
Sorry, but how do you get a nudge to be meaningful when people are getting arguably nudges and notifications?
They choose them.
Right.
We don't know what's going to be a meaningful nudge for each person. We can't guess that. We know what we'd like them to do, but that would just be pushing, right?
Yeah.
So we get them to choose to commit to certain behavioural changes, which they personally feel, would be meaningful. And so that seems to make a difference, rather than just kind of forcing them to do stuff. I'll show you some examples. When do you do which? Well, you have to create an experience which is going to transform people if they don't care. If they don't care about diversity inclusion, if they don't care about coaching people, if they don't care about other people, then creating an experience which really moves people is your best bet. If you were going to create an e-learning module to make people care about data protection, and I've had to do that several times, create something that's really moving to the extent that you can. But if you know that they really care about something, don't waste any time at all on instructional design. Give them a checklist. There's no instructional design on Google. It doesn't bother any of us. We don't want instructional design. We actively avoid it. And I'm going to show you some examples. And this is one that John and the Tilt team will recognize. When I joined BP, which was about 9 years ago, there were 8 hours of e-learning modules for new starters. 8 hours. And I owned them. It was my portfolio. And we had about 6,000 people joining BP every year. And so I did what you would do in my position. I thought, well, let's have a look at the usage data. Any guesses how many people had actually completed the 8 hours of e-learning modules in their 4-year history?
6%.
6%? I'm not even sure percentage-wise. 300 people out of a total population of, 24,000 over that period. 300 people had ever completed them. So I said, this is terrible. We're going to scrap these. And we did something really radical, which is we talked to people. We spent time with groups of people finding out what they cared about after they joined, finding out what really mattered. And some of it was kind of really soft skills, and some of it was really tactical stuff. So for example, they wanted to fit in. That was what they really cared about. They wanted to fit in. So we filmed lots of people talking about what's your advice for fitting in? And we got lots of informal reactions from people, nothing scripted, just people saying, well, if you want to fit in, here's what you should do. Here's my advice. We can just hit play and you can see if you can move it on slightly there. The other thing that we did that was super successful, in fact, the single most popular thing in the program, was we built checklists. They were really easy to build. It didn't involve a lot of rich media. We just had simple checklists that people could use, and those were the most downloaded asset. Yeah, skip along on the timeline there if you can to go in a little bit to maybe about there. Oh, we did animations as well. John will probably remember some of these. We didn't build e-learning modules, we just built simple animations.
Used to waterproof towers and tar roads. 330 degrees Celsius.
So those were super popular. We built a game, in fact, that people could play. I think that might still be on the iPad App Store. So it really got people involved. They felt the impact of making bad decisions. The other thing that we did that was super effective is we borrowed an idea from the CIA. But our slogan at the time was, doing good things for bad people. I think which is often the position that we find ourselves in learning. But this people loved. Instead of patronizing people by putting content in a module, we said, well, if people want to know this, why don't we just put it all in a fact sheet? So if you're going into a meeting with somebody from upstream or downstream or whatever, or shipping, you've just got all the information to hand that you can scan the night before. And this was really popular. So this idea of integrating resources really worked. Did it work? Anybody want to guess at how many hits we got to this site?
Just internal.
Over a 4-year period, just internal, yeah. It's an organisation with about 140,000 people, 6,000 new starters a year. This is not mandatory, entirely elective. Nobody has to do it.
Were you counting people going back and looking again?
We were counting unique users, 20% of the population. We got 1 million hits to this site. It was the most popular site anywhere in the organisation, full stop, apart from the expenses site. And the majority of the organisation, about 80% of the people, despite not being new starters, had gone to the site and visited it. And it had a transformative effect on the industry, I think it's fair to say. Lots of people started to do the same thing with induction programs. Barclays did. I think Deloitte, discovered Deloitte. People started to think, why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we just give people the stuff that they need when they join? Why wouldn't you just talk to people and say, what are you struggling with? Why can't we give you the resources that are going to help you to do the job?
Because they don't have any budget.
Oh, but that's very interesting. That's a really good point, because I'd been working on e-learning modules for maybe 15 years as a Flash developer. I started out at Siemens, and you know the way that goes, right? You're not using Flash anymore, but it takes 6 months. You go through various stages of scripting. Even if you outsource the development of a Flash module to somebody who does it really cheaply, you're sort of looking at kind of 10K or something like that. So if you've got a suite of modules, it becomes very expensive, and then you've got to maintain them, and they don't get updated. How much does it cost to build a checklist? You can literally do it in an afternoon. I was sitting on a train back from Derby. We were doing a leadership program on the way back to Derby. I thought, wouldn't it be useful to type up a new starters checklist for new leaders? I did it. I published it on the train to LinkedIn. There are 20,000 hits to that checklist. It doesn't have to be more expensive. Some of the videos that we shot and the game were costly to produce, and I'm not sure I would do them in the same way again. But we found that it meant that we could hand back control of the creative process to people who'd been alienated by the Flash development approach. It was like, no, this is how we do e-learning, we outsource it, we script it, whatever. And now it was like, no, you can create a checklist in PowerPoint, you can create an infographic in PowerPoint, you can shoot videos on your iPhone. And that, I think, was a really positive message for people in learning who'd got stuck in this idea that digital learning had to be e-learning modules. It meant that we could involve lots of new people in the process.
You mentioned when you started, you had an expectation of people doing 8 hours worth of training.
Yeah.
Did they, by going back, still rack up, 3 or 4 hours of training, or was it very quick visits? Were you measuring time on the site?
We were measuring. We used Google Analytics, so we got all the stuff that Google Analytics does. But we had very odd questions from our colleagues. People would ask, how long does it take to do? I say, well, how long does it take to do the internet? You're not supposed to do it. There's nothing to do, it's just there. And people say, well, does it score completion? Well, what if it's a checklist and you just download it? Do we score that as completion? Why would you even use any of those? Those are educational metrics. They're not learning metrics. Learning is very different. I'll tell you about
But
learning.
what I mean is that if you said to somebody, I want you to do 8 hours of training, they
Yeah.
go, no way. But actually, were people still spending sizable amounts of time on their training, but because they were in charge of it and using it differently, they were enjoying it, and they didn't recognize
Good
that.
question. They were getting the bits that they wanted, not the bits that as an organisation we wanted to push. So it shifted the kind of the locus of control. So on balance, they were spending less time, but they were getting more out of it.
Nick, I think
Yeah.
one of the stats was it was an average dwell time of about 6 minutes,
Yeah,
which is fantastic. Someone non-mandatory going onto the site,
yeah. But they were coming back.
and they were coming back.
Yeah. And other people were coming there to learn about the organisation. It was a very odd thing that we changed BP by doing this. We changed the culture because it was the first time that there was a website that told everybody about who we are, what we do, and how we do it. But had we asked for permission to do that at the beginning of the project, we would never have got it. It was only because people thought we were doing some grubby e-learning development on the side. Nobody wanted to be remotely interested in it. Yes?
So I see organisations kind of tend to think of people as either incapable or unconsciously incompetent.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say or not? And they usually want to standardise and they want to demonstrate something or measure something.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about how you kind of flip that? Or
Yes.
how you went about challenging that? Because that's generally
Yeah.
what they want to do, right?
That's right. You enter into a conversation, and quite often the premise is they think it's education, and they think your job is to force feed people content that they're not interested in. And so quite often you slip into this conspiracy of convenience, where you create some kind of a course, either face-to-face or an e-learning module, where people are being force-fed stuff that they're not really interested in. So the way to flip that is performance consulting. I'm not the first person to talk about that, but it's basically to say, let's just set that aside. Before we start talking about topics, what's the outcome? What's the outcome you want to achieve? What would you see happening differently in the business if this program was successful? And you say, well, we'd see people doing more of this and more of this and more of this. And you say, okay, hold it there. Before we create any courseware or content, let's go and talk to these people and ask them, what would help you to do more of this? And then maybe some of that's training, but maybe some of it is just useful resources. Maybe some of it's just kind of change in the way that things are incentivized or the way things work. And any of you who work in training will recognize this dynamic. You're quite often asked to fix something that fundamentally isn't a training problem. So the answer to your question is, how do you get around that? Is you say, I don't want to talk about topics and content. I want to talk about behaviors and what will actually be different. And then the next step is go and talk to those people. Say, what's stopping you doing this? How can we help? It's a very different conversation, but you get very different outputs from it. Sometimes they want a chance to practice things, so you design an experience. Other times they just want simple, usable guidance. This is something we created for HSBC. I'm not going to talk about it particularly. It's for new leaders. It's just useful stuff on a mobile device, resources that will help them to do the things that they're trying to do. But then the other side of it is experiences, creating experiences which change people. And that's more of an art than a science, I have to say at this point. This was a program that we built for a big organization who are trying to transform. And we put each of their executive team through 8 weeks of experiences, which forced them to experience the new world at first hand. We used actors a lot for that, so we would have actors in the room. At one point we said, look, your whole business needs to respect a new generation of customer. How well do you understand your new generation of customers? And all the exec team would nod and whatever. And then we said, well, we're going to introduce them. And we walk them into the room. And they have to sit and they have to talk to them and understand them and relate to them. But this is my last slide. So I know that you won't remember very much of this. I know you'll probably remember the marshmallows. You might remember the clapping. You will certainly remember, Sarah, the hugging. I will remember the hugging training. Absolutely. Sophie, sorry. Yes. But maybe remember the learning lobster. So there are basically 3 kind of key things. You can't design learning unless you understand what people care about, because that's what governs all of the encoding information and experiences that happen around them. And that's where education goes wrong. It just says, sit down, shut up, I don't care what your name is, who you are, what you care about, this is what you're going to learn. That's why hardly any of it gets retained. The second thing is, once you know what people care about, you can do something transformative. You can design resources for things they care about, because you know what they care about. Or you can design challenges for the things that they don't, that will make them change, and change what they care about and how they feel.
Why a lobster?
Well, I don't know really. I thought a lobster is a kind of people don't talk enough about lobsters. I think a lobster is a kind of memorable thing. Lobsters can live for up for 130 years. What? You know that? Lobsters can live up to 130 years. That's yeah, yes. So it's a long time. Imagine being at the bottom of the ocean for 130 years. That's something memorable, I guess. So yeah, I just like lobsters. So that brings me to the end. I hope you've enjoyed bits of it. I hope bits of it have been memorable. And thank you very much. You've been a great audience. Thank you.